Hi beautiful people, my name's Emma. If you're new here, welcome. If you're not, then welcome back. It's so lovely to have all of you here. In today's video, we're going to be talking about why people hate Shakespeare. So in case you couldn't tell, I am not one of those people who dislike Shakespeare. In fact, I love Shakespeare. I love Shakespeare. And I wanted to try to understand why a lot of people don't have that same love. So a lot of people have this distaste for Shakespeare. A lot of people, when they meet him for the first time, it's in high school or middle school or college even, and they're assigned to read a Shakespeare play and they're like, ugh, please, no, not Shakespeare. Oh my gosh, heck, no, 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 no. So the reason for this, I think, is because people tend to think of Shakespeare as being very dense, very prolix, very, very difficult to read and to understand. And there is a reason for that stigma. Shakespeare doesn't have to be hard to understand. It can be a little difficult to get past the first barrier of the language, but once you do, it's very, very easy to understand, provided that you're introduced to it in the right way. And I think that the reason that a lot of people have sort of the wrong conception of Shakespeare is because of how they're introduced to him and with what they're introduced to him. So I think a big part of why so many people don't like Shakespeare is because they find him incredibly difficult to understand. And let's be honest here, they're not wrong. If you look at a page of Shakespeare, there's a lot of words, there's a lot of lines. It is dense, it is intense, and sometimes it can be a little difficult to understand. But here's the rub. Shakespeare was never, ever meant to be read. It was not ever meant to be studied in a classroom setting. It was not even actually meant to be read off a page, like you would read a book. So actually in Shakespeare's day, when he was writing, there weren't really a lot of books being produced that weren't historical or religious texts. There weren't novels being published, there weren't stories being published. Shakespeare's plays actually weren't published until after his death. A couple of his poems were, and sometimes poetry was published in those days, but plays and stories and novels, like works of fiction, stuff to read for pleasure, that didn't exist. People weren't publishing that kind of a thing, and even if they were, only the very, very wealthy could afford to buy them or have the time to read them. So Shakespeare was writing not to be read off a page, but to be performed on a stage. So the second part of why Shakespeare is so difficult to understand and so distasteful to so many people is because not only do people read it usually for the first time, oftentimes the plays that are on reading lists in schools to be begun with are kind of the wrong plays, in my opinion. So the three that I see most often are Romeo and Juliet, Julius Caesar, and The Merchant of Venice. Romeo and Juliet, okay, that one gets a free pass. It is literally about teenagers. There is murder and suicide and love and duels and feuds and passion and intrigue and comedy, and there's a lot in there. There's a lot of action, there's a lot of movement. The language is very clear and simple and lyrical, and it is actually a pretty good play to start with. But then Merchant of Venice and Julius Caesar, those are two incredibly dark and complicated plays about that are both studies of human nature and why we do what we do. And for some reason, I just can't picture a bunch of high school students getting hyped up over dudes in togas talking about their life decisions. So Julius Caesar and Merchant of Venice are not really the best plays to start with. Also, their language is dense, it's heavy, it's ponderous to get through, even if you are very familiar with Shakespeare. Those plays are difficult to comprehend. So I think that what I don't see on the list a lot, occasionally Midsummer Night's Dream will come up, and occasionally Twelfth Night, but most of the time there's not really any comedies on the lists. I think that's because people tend to see the comedies as not being as educational or studious, or you're not going to get as much out of them as you would from reading one of the dramatic plays. But you couldn't be farther from the truth. There's some great wit in the comedies. There are some great life lessons in the comedies, and they're funny. They're really, really funny. Some are more melancholy than others. Some that were written later in Shakespeare's life have a little bit of a bittersweet tone to them. not, and there are three plays that are technically classified as comedies that aren't really very funny or lighthearted at all. But they're all very complicated plays and definitely shouldn't be stuff that you would introduce people to Shakespeare with. But going back to Midsummer Night's Dream, that play has a special place in my heart, and it's a great little play. And I mean, that play has magic, it has fairies, it has love spells and love quadrangles. There's 4 of them, and a guy gets his head turned into a donkey, and they're in the woods, and there's madness and mayhem, and it's also just, it's hilarious. It's totally hilarious. And if you were gonna put that in front of a bunch of students and like, here, donkeys and fairies, let's go, I can somehow see that people would get a little bit more excited about that. I've seen little kids, elementary school aged, preschool aged, get super hyped up about Shakespeare because of Midsummer Night's Dream. And again, just kind of like with Romeo and Juliet, the language is very, it's poetic for sure, but it's lyrical, it's clear, it's simple, and for the most part, it's really easy to understand. So in summary, Shakespeare's not meant to be read. It's meant to be seen, plain and simple. And if you go and find a performance, I know we are unfortunately shut out of live theater right now, but there are performances available on YouTube. There are lots of theaters that are actually streaming Shakespeare shows right now because of the current situation. You can find so many great free performances of Shakespeare. And if you're one of those people who doesn't like Shakespeare, then I would highly recommend finding a production of Midsummer Night's Dream, or Romeo and Juliet, or Much Ado About Nothing, or Twelfth Night, and just giving it a watch, and maybe giving Shakespeare a second chance. If you start with a play that's going to be a little more lighthearted, a little easier to understand, and if you watch it, I think you will get a new perspective. And if you're one of those people like me who is in love with Shakespeare, then hopefully this video helped to give you a little bit of a new perspective on why people dislike Shakespeare. So either way, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. Comment down below your favorite Shakespeare play. I'd love to see it. And I will see you all next time. Thank you so much for watching, and have a lovely day.